VenomousStare back with another exciting first-person VOD. This time it's not going to be live, it's going to be casted after the fact. And it's not going to be a hard first-person VOD in the sense that I will never break away from the camera. But we're going to be focusing on my point of view for the majority of the cast. And I'm going to be trying to break down some of the more basic things that I do and talk about my decisions on why I do what. I think one of the struggles with being a StarCraft commentator for over 5 years is the fact that whenever the game first came out, it was very difficult for me to win. I didn't have really any RTS experience, and so you guys don't have a seizure, I'm going to pull out of first person for the time being because I'm just spamming my camera hotkeys between natural and main. So we can see in the FP VOD shot, I did peek over at this gas right here. This allowed me to believe that my ally was going to cheese, because usually when someone takes an early gas, it indicates cheese. As early as he took it, remember he actually did a double extractor trick and made a couple drones and then did gas pool. Extractor trick is whenever you take 2 gases and then make 2 drones or cancel them. You can also just do that with 1 drone. The point is to go up, you have like 14 workers, you're at 14 out of 14 supply as Zerg, you make an extractor, since you lose a drone your supply goes down by 1. You make another drone, and then you cancel the extractor, so then you have negative supply, 15 out of 14. It incurs you a small economic advantage. This really fell out of favor after Wings of Liberty. The only pro gamer that I saw consistently do it was E.G. Suppy, aka Conan Liu. Or Lau, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. But he's the superior wolf, we all love him, and he was the only guy I remember actually gas tricking in pretty much every matchup. My ally has an Evo chamber on the way. Usually whenever you see an Evo chamber this early, and there's another Zerg, you're probably going to get upgrades for Lings and do heavy Ling aggression. In my opinion, you always want to go melee. Whenever you do these aggressive Zergling styles, melee upgrades is superior, because melee upgrade Zerglings do exceptionally well against roaches. Now if you think your opponent is going for +1 roaches, Carapace is good. And the reason that is in StarCraft, some of the upgrade interactions are far more important than others. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if you just think about, okay, the Terran player has 1-1 bio, and he's fighting my 0-1 Lings. You know, there's not a big disparity there. Obviously the Terran has the advantage, but whenever you compare it to an upgrade advantage like +1 attack roaches, obviously range attack, the missiles, versus unupgraded Lings, which is a scenario you see extremely frequently in Zerg versus Zerg, it actually reduces the amount of shots that roaches need to kill the Lings. So they need 1 less volley to kill the Lings. Another great example of this is how +1 Zealots are going to interact with Lings. They go from essentially having to attack twice to just once, which is obviously huge. So frequently, if you know your opponent is going Lings in your toss, you can rush out +1 and go for a more Zealot heavy style as a counter to that. Now conversely, +1 Stalkers, it's not like it's that much of a difference between +1 Stalkers and no upgrade Stalkers versus Lings. And that's what I mean, because even though Stalkers are considered one of the best units to get attack upgrades for, you have specific unit interactions that actually affect it in a more severe way, due to the way the math breaks down, where if you get that attack upgrade it becomes a 2-shot instead of a 3-shot, or a 1-shot instead of a 2-shot, or what have you. So even though I asked my ally if he was going to cheese and he said no, he just did a big coin flip Ling swell. Now this is a really silly play, because essentially any Zerg player in 2v2, if there's another Zerg, first 100 gas on Ling speed, next 50 gas on Bane Nest, and then you should just make a couple blind Bane Links, and it hard counters builds like this. But instead the red team is going to fall a bit behind here, because if we look back in my camp, I'm macroing pretty well. I have 2 bases saturated, 4 gates, a robo, +1 on the way, and I've started to take my 3rd. And if we fire up the units tab, the red team is behind. We can see there was a huge upgrade disparity between Savagewood, the blue Protoss, and the red team, and the blue Zerg was about even. So one of the fundamental parts of 2v2 that sort of goes back until the end of time is a lot of times on a very basic level, in order to execute a strategy, allies have to figure out which one is going to be attacking and which is defending, or if they're both going to try to defend, or if they're both going to try to attack. I know that sounds just exceptionally basic, but if you boil 2v2 down to what it is, at its very basic level, as the third is about to complete here for Savagewood as a roach attack from Doge Lord moves out, on its face, 2v2 doesn't actually play like 1v1. And what do I mean by that? 1v1 is pretty figured out. People know what the metagame is, people know the timings, people know whenever you play one specific race, the different things they can throw at you. Now in 2v2, obviously you can have any combination of races, even two of the same race. So the third gets evacuated here for Savagewood, but you have to consider that a Zerg player might look and say, well, I know when to build units to counter 221, the fast marine droppers. You see a ton of Lings here, as well as Stalker Immortal Sentry here for Savagewood, as it looked like Savagewood was going to have some trouble holding this base until his ally came over and helped him. And with this many Carapace Lings, it's just going to sponge up pretty much all the damage from the Roaches and clean up the attack. And this might sound sort of like a League of Legends-ish thing to say, but if your ally is responsive and is constantly helping you and doing a good job, throw them a token compliment. Because, and again, this might sound more selfish than, you know, hokey League of Legends fellow summoner type shit, but if you talk positively towards your allies whenever they play correctly, they're more likely to help you again or continue to play correctly. About 4 gates are out here for dog meat. These are going for 2 stars, so I would expect to see some Phoenix or probably Void Rays, maybe into carriers even. You know, the carrier got nerfed a bit ago. It's not nearly as good as it used to be, but I still think it can be hard to deal with, especially with proper support. And if we look at the worker tab at this point, I've incurred a huge lead. I have 3 base saturation. Now both of the Zergs are pretty much on sort of crappy 2 base economy, and the Protoss is on, you know, kind of crappy 2 base economy. I'm on full-blown 3. The Lings are 1-1 now, which makes them very obnoxious to deal with. There is +1 Carapace here for Doge Lord, but honestly it's not going to make that much of a difference. Thankfully the Zerg player does manage to hold the attack of the blue team. Nice to see a little Observer out here for Savagewood. He has it in what I like to call Observer Siege mode. This update came out about a year ago. Essentially, it's an update aimed at bad players that good players can benefit from, where you can set your observers to be static. So if you ever have to panic and hit your Control Army hotkey, I'm going to bring it back a little. If you ever have to panic and hit your Control Army hotkey, if you have observers spread across the map like a good player should, then you're not going to screw up all your observers, because these are static. You have to unsiege them. You always want to walk a little bit forward with your observer to see what they have. And even with speed lots, the trick is let them extend onto the army where they're in range, but then you want to sort of cut them off whenever they get in melee range. So what does that mean? It means let them get close enough to where they overextend past the other part of the army, but once they're actually close enough to you, mitigate the damage with force fields. Whenever you see a Protoss player starting to mass air, you gotta ping it. Because one of the easiest ways to lose team games is to be caught off guard by a bunch of air. You know, you do a big mid-game attack and you show up at their base, and what do you know? There's 6 carriers. And if you get that caught off guard by carriers, it can be very difficult to win. So we can go back to my point of view cam. And I just want to point out how good this observer is, because essentially you can see what they're making and you're not really going to miss any attack. You know, they can't run out and backdoor, you know, and there's no backdoor. There's only one way to exit, and an observer in this position sees it all. A lot of people like to put it here because it's on this little cliff. I don't think that's actually as good, because when you put it here, the choke is a little more narrow and you can't miss anything. ZVZ players will know that oftentimes, like if you have an air spotter like an Overlord at a more wide choke, sometimes they can run a bunch of lings around the corner and really fool you. We see some nice 4 base saturation here from Savage Wood. And notice that I've transferred workers out of my main, and I really need to transfer workers out of my natural. There I go. Not too late actually, it was only at 16 out of 14. And you always want to do this whenever it goes in the red, box a few, send them to your new base. And especially in team games, I like to just keep expanding. You keep wanting places to send your new army. Of course you want to keep making army and keep teching up, but on big maps especially, you don't want to be shy about expanding. The other team has to have map control to come and stop you, and whenever they're being constantly attacked, it can be hard for them. Now I don't mean take every base like a moron, but we can see here that I'm getting both Observer and Warp Prism speed. I'm working on +3, gotten Storm, and I have double Robo as well as a ton of gates. So there are a plethora of options for me to go to, 18 gateways. And Lordship here has gone for Mutas. Now earlier when I was talking about whether one player attacks or defends or both attack, in this game we see the classic example of one player plays aggressive and keeps the opponents on the back foot, and the other one macros very hard. And just by looking at units, my economy is probably double about everyone else's in the game. I'm just obliterating everyone. And because my opponent is constantly keeping them on the back foot, it means that I can continue to expand aggressively and macro very hard and play greedy and just keep taking bases. And I'm pinging the cannon here because I'm trying to harass with some DT, and I want the detection to die. And intelligently, my ally once again listens. DT snipes a base. So earlier I spoke about the fact that you'll have a player be aggressive and then another one macro behind it. That's just a very basic 2v2 premise. But let me talk about another basic 2v2 premise. If you go for a strategy like that, it means that once you incur your macro advantage, you can start to help your ally attack. When they do their harassment attacks, suddenly you hit your big attacks like this. Storm's going down, blink under the carriers, and with only 3 carriers, even though there's not a whole lot of anti-air here, what you really want to aim for is just to snipe the base and run, because you don't have enough Stalker Archon to really want to scrap with these carriers. You have a lot of sentries, immortals, and that good stuff, but carriers, you really want to make Archon and Storm against them and a few Blink Stalkers to really get under them. And a Roach attack was attempted over here at the 3rd, and Mutas were pulled back to help defend in conjunction with Zealots and DTs, and it does virtually no damage. And at this point I'm on an absolutely huge economy. It was sort of a mistake not to hit this earlier. A lot of times when you're very far ahead, it can be worth making one DT or one Zealot and just shift clicking it around bases, especially against Zerg. So remember, I just killed this base and I was over here, so I know the Protoss is behind. I sniped this Zerg base, and my ally and I have sniped both of the corner Zerg bases. And I'm looking to take his base right after, that's twisted. Our opponents are incredibly far behind, so what we need to do here is join all of our stuff together and end the game. And if we look at this Protoss army, it's the stuff of nightmares, minus maybe a couple air units and a mothership. This army is just vicious. Well upgraded, hefty mix of Archon, Immortal, Sentry Stalker, Colossus Zealot, High Templar. I mean, what counters this army? First of all, I don't care what race you play, when you see 10 Archons coming at you, that is terrifying. And you throw the rest of this in the mix, it's brutal. Shit, if you throw just the High Templar in the mix, it's really brutal. And we can see the red team sees that army, says, well, there's no way in hell we'll be able to defend that. And the blue team is just going to devastate the base. However, with mostly air units here for the red team, Lordship might be able to clean this up. This one Archon will sort of be a pain in the ass. But Savagewood is going to continue to aggress with some sloppy shift A moves here. And remember, the economy for the red team is so bad that they can't really reinforce or hold this off, and Dogmeat decides to leave. Savagewood keeps walking his units forward. The mutas are cleaned up even if the Spire dies. I mean, yeah, he killed the Spire, but there's like 30 Corruptors. Oh shit, 29. So that's the game. The blue team wins. The Zerg was aggressive early, and the Protoss macroed very heavily to incur an insurmountable advantage. One of the things I want to talk about is, after my macro really got going, I made 2 robos, a robo support bay, and I just kept filling out the tech tree. I didn't go for Stargate and Mothership, but I did pretty much get everything else. And even though I had a lot of chrono built up, which is not really good, once you have this many bases it can be difficult. But you pretty much want to just permanently chrono boost your forge and your robos. Like anytime you pan back to your base and you know you have 4+ bases, throw a chrono on those robos, throw a chrono on that forge. Remember, it's always better to spend your resources, whether it be building energy or your minerals or gas. It's always better to spend that shit than it is to float it. So that was a little bit of a beginner commentary. I focused on some more basics than usual, but if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more.